Well, welcome everybody. I'm Dave Alden, and I'm here to share some solutions to what keeps business owners up at night. As a Vistage chair, I'm not the one with all the answers. What I try to do is to bring in some of the top talent that is experts in an area. And the number one issue that my members talk about all the time is hiring, onboarding, and retaining top talent. And today we happen to have an expert in that field from Holy City HR in Bethlehem, appropriately named, was Dan Foglia. Dan, please say hello.
Well, thanks for having me, David.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And you've done a lot of work I've seen in the HR space with a tremendous background, both academically and from a business perspective. And one of it looks like one of the things you've really focused in on most recently is onboarding employees. And it's one of those things I haven't run across a whole lot as people that specialize in that area, but I'm going to guess that's probably a pretty important thing for a company. So tell me a little bit about why you took a deep dive into onboarding and a little bit about it, what you're doing.
Yeah, sure thing. And you're right about that. Not a lot of people niche down into something like that. The HR world, it's very vast and there's a lot of different elements of HR. So when you think of HR, it's usually in these three different categories of, recruiting, retention, and you have your employee relations, you have your benefits admin, 401k and retirement plans, things of that nature. So I realized that through both my corporate experience and now as a consultant, one thing rang true that every organization I was a part of, onboarding was always an issue. And the reason why it's so important is because that's where everything begins and ends and sets the trajectory of that new hire from the jump. Culture setting, expectations, early turnover, which is a killer right now in corporate America. You're seeing a lot of quiet quitting, a lot of people who are there for maybe 3, 4 months and leaving, ghosting, things of that nature. A lot of that has to do with onboarding. You'd be surprised how much of that really does start right in that first 90 days. If you don't get that right, you're in a world of trouble.
That doesn't surprise me at all. So, how about a couple little some secret sauce in terms of what the stuff, just a couple of best practices on onboarding. And I know but I've seen the work that you've done, and it's really detailed. With you have a tremendous amount of resources that are available to people that do interact with you on it. But maybe you can just share just a couple of the highest leverage items, I guess would be the question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the first thing with onboarding is a lot of times people confuse onboarding and orientation. And orientation is a part of onboarding. And orientation is usually that 1 day or 3 days, sometimes longer, a week or two. And that's where you get, your Stanley with the company logo on it and, the mouse pads and all that fun stuff. And that's orientation. That's just one area. Onboarding is pre-boarding, which is before you even begin to hire for a role, having the right FTE count, having the right job description, understanding what that role, the essential functions of that role really is. Is it measurable as well? Huge mistake as far as secret sauce goes. You can't measure it, you can't manage it. And that's very much true when it comes to having a job description that's measurable. When this person comes in, if you don't have mechanisms in place to be able to evaluate them properly, that's objective and not judgment based or anything like that, you're already failing. You're already behind the eight ball in that regard. So it's important to have that measurable job description and then moving on from there, when you go past through the orientation, you have, your evaluation periods, you're meeting with the manager and the employee. Here's the thing too, you probably heard this too, David. People don't leave organizations, they leave bosses, they leave leaders. And a lot of that has to do with your management team. So you as a CEO can only do so much. And there's a lot of pressure unfairly on CEOs now to create these environments that are just, so employee friendly with like free foosball tables and all this kind of stuff. And there's this unfair pressure on CEOs to create this, Google type environment. And it's really, that stuff doesn't work anyway. Really, what works is the relationship between the manager and that employee. That's the most important. So, secret sauce wise, aside from having a measurable job description, is the relationship between the manager and that employee and having that cadence and having those things documented and having structure.
Well, I guess it comes down to really the basics, right? And the employee journey has so many elements as you talk about it. And that onboarding piece, as soon as you start talking about things like objective, results-oriented position description, It makes a lot of sense to me because it impacts so many things that happen downstream. When you have objective data
Mhm.
and results-oriented hiring process, if you have a results-oriented employee that's
Mhm.
is fair to them for coaching too when they're doing that. How about anything else that people talk about a lot of times is, read the manual and well, and then, they throw a big book at them. Here are the rules and regulations. I know there's more to it than just that. Any other insights that you can give us?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you get a lot of that stigma and misconception in the HR world of like the hall monitor and the policies, procedures, and the handbooks and all that. Yeah, that stuff protects you, of course. Policies do protect you. But really, what it comes down to in the HR side is more about process. So I have this saying, tough on process, tender on people. And you just mentioned, David, about coaching and being able to create an environment, foster an environment that's friendly towards that. If you don't have process, standardized, like basic processes beyond just policy and stuff, like literal process, then when you go into a room and have a conversation with an employee or with a subordinate, whatever you want to call it, they are looking at you as you are the aggressor almost. Where now these conversations, especially in the new workforce that are coming in, the Gen Zers, these conversations need to be direct, but there has to be a process you can point to. If not, you're the one who's delivering this message and it creates this resentment. And this is where like the emotional intelligence side of HR comes out. Like, well, without the process and it's just me speaking to that person, they're actually taking out their frustrations against me as the leader, that I'm trying to target them in some way. Or I'm like, I have a problem with them. And people use these terms all the time, targeting and bullying and harassing and things. They're overused all the time because you lack process. So when you have something to point to in that room, that's where the magic happens, in my opinion. Now you partner with that person and say, hey, how can I help you as more of a leader and a coach to get you where you need to be? But the process is non-negotiable. But so many companies just lack that. And you just get these really contentious conversations that occur and managers who are really not good at those conversations. They're very bad at the uncomfortable conversation. And without that process, you're going into war without Kevlar. I mean, you got to give them something to go into war. And I think that's the biggest problem I see.
Yeah, I gotcha. It's the human condition not to want to have those confrontational conversations. So I guess it would be really helpful. Another thing I see that you've been involved with Vistage, and so in a couple different ways. So any insights you can provide us, kind of just transitioning the conversation just a little bit. You're a resource to Vistage
Mhm.
members and what keeps them up at night, but you've also been part of the process. Any observations that you can share with individuals about what Vistage is all about and what you've got out of it?
Yeah, I love Vistage for the resources that it brings. I think that being part of a trusted advisors group is great. So when there's a leader that is in need of a specialized area, I think you mentioned from the onset, David, it's important to bring in subject matter experts in each area. So it's incredibly resourceful, even for myself as an advisor, to link up with other advisors and other people that are specialists in their own areas. I've done a lot of great business for myself just having those resources. So I think that in itself is a huge value to have a room full of subject matter experts you can call upon. Um, I also noticed too that there's a lot of things that CEOs that keep them up at night and leaders that they can't really articulate just yet. But when you have the conversations with folks, then you'll be able to kind of understand what exactly it is that you need. And sometimes it's just hard to put it into words. I think from the HR side, what I see a lot too is that I think what keeps them up is that you have the strategic plan. You have the 3 year or 5 year plan that you've spent a lot of time on with your leadership team. And what's scary is that that plan will die in that room you made it in if you don't have the workforce and the strategy of the workforce to carry it out. That's scary because you're putting a lot of money and time and effort into something that's your vision, it's your baby, it's what you've been entrusted with. But you can't seem to get everyone on the same page with you. There's always seems to be this the folks that just don't really see your vision or understand it. And that's where a workforce strategy comes into place. That's where HR can really help bridge the gap, be the intercessor between leader and employee workforce and bring that whole thing to fruition. And everyone's clicking on all cylinders. So I do see that a lot.
That's great. Well, Dan, suppose our viewers want to get in contact with you. Very memorable name, Holy City HR. So what's your website? How would somebody get in touch with you if they want to have a little more dialogue about some of their HR employee journey, even if it's not onboarding?
Sure. It's holyhr.com. So you can go there, you go on the website. There's a couple of things you'll see on the website. Obviously, I have the consulting services that I provide, and also I give away a part one of our onboarding program, a 90-day onboarding program, pre-built, plug and play. You can access that right from the website. Get part one for free. At least to give you a chance to get started. I mean, the quickest way to get ahead is to get started, right? So at least you have something that you can sink your teeth into. It's a great solution. It took me 15 years to figure out all the problems with onboarding, so I just gave you all one shot. You also find me on LinkedIn, Holy City HR or Daniel J. Foglia on LinkedIn. And you can find me anywhere. And I'm around town between Southeast Philly and also Lehigh Valley.
I say, how good is that you're able to share that kind of great information? Dan, it's been great talking to you, great interacting with you, and thanks everybody for viewing.